On my 28th birthday, my family threw a surprise party and didn't invite me. They posted it all over Facebook while I was working a double shift to pay their mortgage. They thought I'd just forgive them like I always do, so I made one phone call and set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The exhaustion was a familiar ache, a heavy blanket settling deep into my bones. 16 hours. A full double shift in the pediatric ward, a chaotic symphony of beeping monitors, crying children, and anxious parents. It was my 28th birthday, but the world inside the hospital walls didn't care. I had traded cake and candles for sterile gloves and the smell of antiseptic, a choice I'd made without a second thought. That was my life. Duty first, self second. I finally pushed open the door to my small apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the noise I'd left behind. My phone, which had been off all day, felt like a lead weight in my hand. I'd expected a few texts, maybe a missed call. A simple, happy birthday, we love you from my mom, Margaret, or a goofy, emoji-filled message from my younger sister, Jessica. There was nothing, not a single notification. A cold knot of disappointment tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down. They were busy. They knew I was working. It was fine. I kicked off my comfortable, worn-out nursing shoes, dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and sank onto the sofa, the cushions sighing under my weight. I just wanted to zone out, to scroll through the meaningless highlight reels of other people's lives until my brain went numb. I opened Facebook, my thumb moving on autopilot. And then I saw it. The first photo was a group shot. My mom, Margaret, stood in the center, her arm wrapped tightly around Jessica. They were in my parents' backyard, the one I had spent a whole summer helping my dad re-landscape. String lights twinkled above them, and a massive, professionally printed banner was strung between two oak trees. "Congratulations, Jessica," it screamed in glittery gold letters. My sister was beaming, holding a bouquet of roses, her other hand on her hip in that classic influencer pose she'd perfected. Surrounding them were my aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole extended family. They were all smiling, champagne flutes raised in a toast. The caption, posted by my mom, read, "So proud of our girl Jessica for hitting 10,000 followers. Threw a little surprise party to celebrate her amazing achievement. To the moon, sweetie." My breath hitched. The photo was timestamped 2 hours ago. My thumb trembled as I scrolled. More photos appeared. A close-up of a 3-tiered cake, decorated with a fondant version of Jessica's social media handle. A video of everyone shouting, "Surprise!" as Jessica walked into the backyard, feigning shock. A photo of Jessica opening gifts. A new designer handbag from my parents, a new laptop from my grandparents, a cascade of expensive-looking presents from everyone else. It was a full-blown, catered event. The kind of party I had never had. The kind of party I had dreamed of for my 16th, my 21st, my graduation from nursing school, all milestones that had passed with a quiet dinner or, in the case of my graduation, a simple card because money was tight. I scrolled and scrolled, a hollow, ringing sound filling my ears. Every photo was a fresh stab of pain. They were all there. My entire family, celebrating my sister on my birthday. I wasn't just forgotten, I was completely erased. It was as if I didn't exist. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They had actively chosen to celebrate someone else on that day, in a place I considered a second home, with every single person I loved. The excuse, I knew, would be that they didn't want to bother me. They knew I was working. They were being considerate. But this wasn't consideration. This was a statement. It was a declaration of my place in the family hierarchy, the reliable, invisible workhorse whose feelings were an afterthought. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They could have chosen any other day, any other weekend. But they chose this one, my day. As if to rub my nose in the fact that Jessica's trivial social media milestone was more important than the day I was born. My phone screen blurred as tears I hadn't realized were coming finally spilled over. I looked around my quiet, empty apartment, the silence now feeling suffocating. For years, I had swallowed my hurt, accepted the excuses, and told myself that being the responsible one was its own reward. I had sacrificed so much for them, in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. And this was my reward: to be a ghost at my own family's party. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The tears eventually subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard numbness. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, the glow of my phone screen the only light in the room, illuminating the smiling, oblivious faces of my family. It was almost midnight when my phone finally buzzed. A text from my mom. "Hope you had an okay day at work, sweetie. We missed you tonight. Jessica had her party. It was lovely. Talk tomorrow. Zoe." An okay day at work. We missed you. The casual, almost flippant tone of the message was like salt in an open wound. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a footnote. An afterthought to an event I should have been at the center of, if not for my birthday, then at least as a member of the family. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, 1,000 angry, hurt responses swirling in my mind. How could you? On my birthday? Did you forget I existed? But I didn't type any of them. What was the point? It would only lead to a fight where I would somehow be painted as the villain, ungrateful, dramatic, jealous. I had played that scene out too many times before. Instead, I just stared at the message until the screen went dark. Sleep was a distant, impossible dream. My mind was a relentless carousel of past slights, a highlight reel of every forgotten birthday, every overlooked achievement, every time I had put my family's needs before my own. The time my parents missed my nursing school graduation ceremony to take Jessica on a last-minute weekend trip to cheer her up after a minor breakup. The Christmas they accidentally forgot to buy me a gift because they were so focused on getting Jessica the exact designer boots she wanted. Each memory was a tiny paper cut, and tonight they had all started bleeding at once. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail, my stomach churning at the thought of hearing her cheerful, oblivious voice. I knew what the call would be, not an apology but a request. She'd need me to pick up a prescription for my dad, or watch their dog while they went out, or lend her money for some new, frivolous purchase for Jessica. My role in the family was one of utility. I was the fixer, the provider, the ever-reliable safety net. I listened to the voicemail a few minutes later. "Hi, honey, it's me," her voice chirped. "Just calling to see if you're free this afternoon. Jessica's friend is having a get-together and she needs a ride. Also, I was wondering if you could." I deleted the message before she could finish. The audacity was stunning. After what they had done, they still expected me to be at their beck and call, to be Jessica's personal chauffeur. A strange sense of calm washed over me, displacing the hurt and anger. It was the calm of a decision being made. For years, I had accepted this dynamic. I had enabled it. I had quietly cleaned up their messes, both financial and emotional, telling myself it was what good daughters did. I had shouldered burdens they never knew existed, all while they celebrated Jessica for simply existing. I had let them believe they were financially stable, that my dad's remote job was keeping them afloat. I had protected their pride, their comfort, their illusion of a perfect life. And in doing so, I had allowed them to treat me like I was worthless. I walked over to my desk and unlocked a small metal filing cabinet. I pulled out a thick folder, the label written in my neat, precise handwriting. Family finances. Inside were bank statements, mortgage documents, wire transfer receipts, 3 years of silent sacrifice. 3 years of my nursing salary, my double shifts, my foregone vacations, all funneled directly into their lives to keep their heads above water. They thought I was just a quiet, boring nurse with no life of her own. They had no idea I was the only thing standing between them and foreclosure. As I looked at the neatly organized papers, a single thought echoed in my mind, clear and sharp as a shard of glass. I had been their pillar for too long. It was time to show them what happened when that pillar was removed, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. My entire life had been a masterclass in contrasts between myself and my sister, Jessica. From the moment she was born, it was as if she had arrived with her own personal spotlight, and I was relegated to the shadows, a permanent stagehand in the production of her life. I was the easy child, quiet, studious, and independent. I learned to tie my own shoes, read on my own, and never caused a fuss. My mother, Margaret, would often boast to her friends, "Oh, Elizabeth just raises herself. She's always been such an old soul." It was meant as a compliment, but it always felt like a dismissal. It was an excuse to focus all her maternal energy on Jessica. Jessica was the spirited one. That was the polite term for loud, demanding, and perpetually in need of attention. If she scraped her knee, it required a week of doting and special treats. If she got a B on a test, it was a family crisis that required tutors and a conference with the teacher. My straight A's, on the other hand, were met with a distracted "that's nice, honey," before the conversation invariably shifted back to Jessica's latest drama. Their love for me felt like a comfortable, worn armchair, assumed, reliable, and mostly ignored. Their love for Jessica was a blazing fire they were constantly tending to, terrified it might go out. The financial favoritism started early. When I was 16, I worked all summer at a local diner to save up for a used car. I bought a reliable 10-year-old sedan, and the pride I felt in that achievement was immense. 2 years later, when Jessica turned 16, she threw a tantrum because she didn't want a used, gross car. My parents, despite claiming money was tight, co-signed a loan for a brand-new convertible. The excuse? Jessica is just more social, honey. She needs something reliable to drive her friends around. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. I worked my way through nursing school, juggling classes with part-time jobs, and graduated with a mountain of student loans but a fierce sense of accomplishment. Jessica enrolled in a liberal arts college, changed her major 3 times, and eventually dropped out to pursue her dream of becoming a social media influencer. My parents funded the entire endeavor: the expensive camera, the new wardrobe, the trips to photogenic locations. My practical, life-saving career was seen as drab and dutiful, while Jessica's quest for online fame was framed as a brave, entrepreneurial venture. My mother was the primary architect of this dynamic. Margaret had been an elementary school teacher before she retired, and she treated her own daughters like 2 different types of students. I was the gifted, low-maintenance one who could be left to her own devices. Jessica was the struggling student who needed constant praise and accommodation. Margaret would meticulously curate Jessica's online image, leaving fawning comments on every post. "That's my beautiful, talented girl." Or "You are destined for greatness." She was a full-time stage mom for a 25-year-old. Her praise for me was always backhanded, framed in the context of my utility. "Elizabeth is so responsible. I don't know what we'd do without her," she'd say to family friends, not with pride, but with a sigh of relief, as if my reliability was a convenience that allowed her to focus on what really mattered: Jessica. I was the family's foundation, and Jessica was the shiny, decorative facade. They never realized that a facade can't stand without a foundation to hold it up. The ultimate proof of this came 3 years ago. My dad's small construction business had gone under during an economic downturn. He was a proud man, and the failure devastated him. He and my mom were on the verge of losing the house they'd lived in for 30 years. They sat me down, tears in my mother's eyes, and confessed their dire situation. Jessica wasn't present for this conversation. She was on a networking trip in Miami, funded by their rapidly dwindling savings. My dad looked broken. My mom looked terrified. That night I went home, looked at my own modest savings, and made a decision. I told them I would help. We concocted a story. My dad had found a quiet, remote consulting job that paid just enough to cover the bills. It was a lie to protect their pride, a lie to shield my mother from the shame of her husband's failure and my sister from any hint of inconvenience. In reality, I set up a direct, automatic transfer. Every month, a significant portion of my salary, the money earned from missed holidays, grueling double shifts, and a non-existent social life, went directly to their mortgage payment. They never questioned it. They were just so relieved that their comfortable life could continue, uninterrupted. And I, their responsible, self-raising daughter, faded even further into the background, the silent, unacknowledged architect of their survival. For 2 days after my non-birthday, I operated on a kind of numb autopilot. I went to work, cared for my small patients with a gentle, focused demeanor that belied the storm raging inside me, and came home to the crushing silence of my apartment. I ignored my mother's calls and texts, each one a cheerful, oblivious inquiry into my schedule, always with a follow-up request for a favor. The lack of any acknowledgement of my birthday, or any apology for the party, was so complete it felt like a form of gaslighting. I was beginning to question my own right to be hurt. Was I overreacting? Was I just being selfish? That's when I called my Aunt Catherine. Catherine was my dad's older sister, a no-nonsense retired lawyer with a sharp mind and a low tolerance for family drama. She had always been my quiet champion, the one who would send me a separate, thoughtful gift for my birthday and call to ask how I was really doing. I hadn't seen her at the party photos, which was both a relief and a puzzle. "I wasn't there," she said, her voice tight with disapproval before I even had a chance to ask. "Your mother called me to invite me to Jessica's big celebration." I asked her what day it was on, and when she told me it was the 28th, I said, "You mean on Elizabeth's birthday?" There was this long pause, and then she gave me some flimsy excuse about how you were working and they didn't want you to feel left out, so they just combined the events. Catherine snorted. I told her that was the most ridiculous, cruel thing I had ever heard, and that I wouldn't be attending. I will celebrate my niece's birthday with her, not at a party that pretends she doesn't exist. Hearing her words felt like a dam breaking inside me. The validation was so powerful it brought fresh tears to my eyes. I wasn't crazy. It was cruel. "I just don't understand how they can be so blind," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's not blindness, honey," Catherine said gently. "It's willful ignorance. They have built a comfortable world for themselves, and you are the silent cog that keeps the machine running. They don't want to look too closely at the cog, because then they might have to acknowledge what it's made of." We talked for over an hour. I told her everything, not just about the party, but about the years of feeling invisible, about the constant financial and emotional sacrifices. And then, for the first time, I told her the whole truth about the mortgage. The line went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold with a lawyerly fury. "Elizabeth, how long has this been going on?" 3 years, I admitted. "And they have no idea. They think it's from a consulting job Dad got. A fiction you all created to protect your mother's sensibilities," Catherine finished, her tone laced with exasperation. "Elizabeth, you are a wonderful, loving daughter, but you are not a doormat. You have propped them up for so long that they've forgotten how to stand on their own 2 feet. It's time for a change, not for them, but for you." Her words solidified the fragile resolve that had been forming in my heart. This wasn't just about a forgotten birthday anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I was no longer a passive victim of my family's neglect. I was an active participant in my own diminishment. And that was going to stop. After the call, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I spent the rest of the evening taking the first concrete steps of my plan. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or a tearful confrontation. That was their style, not mine. My approach would be quiet, methodical, and irrefutable. I logged into my online banking portal. For 3 years, I had meticulously documented everything. I created a new folder on my desktop, The Reckoning. I downloaded every bank statement showing the monthly transfers to my parents' mortgage account. I found the original loan agreement I had co-signed for Jessica's college tuition, a loan I was still paying off because she had defaulted on it. I printed every document, the whir of my cheap home printer a satisfying soundtrack to my newfound mission. As I compiled the evidence, I wasn't just looking at financial records. I was looking at a quantifiable measure of my love and sacrifice. Each number represented a double shift, a skipped vacation, a decision to put their needs before my own wants. It was all there in black and white. This was my leverage. This was the clever trap. They had built their comfortable lives on a foundation of my quiet labor, assuming it would always be there, silent and unconditional. They were about to learn that foundations can develop cracks, and sometimes they crumble entirely. The investigation was complete. Now, all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to present my findings. The perfect moment arrived, as I knew it would less than a week later. My mom called, her voice a little strained from my days of silence. "Elizabeth, we're having a family dinner on Sunday, just us. I'd really like it if you came. We miss you." It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as I was going to get. A reluctant olive branch, likely prompted by a guilty conscience, or more cynically, the realization that her usual stream of favors had run dry. "I'll be there," I said, my voice even and calm. I knew this dinner wasn't for my benefit. It was for theirs. It was a way to smooth things over without actually addressing the problem, to pull me back into the family orbit so things could return to normal. But I had no intention of letting things return to normal. I arrived at my parents' house on Sunday with a large leather portfolio tucked under my arm. The atmosphere was thick with forced cheerfulness. My dad gave me a slightly too long hug, a silent apology in his eyes. My mom fussed over me, complimenting my sweater and offering me a drink with frantic energy. Jessica, however, was cool and distant, barely looking up from her phone. To her, I was the one who had created this awkwardness by being inexplicably moody. We sat down to dinner, and for a while the conversation was painfully banal: the weather, a neighbor's new dog, my dad's garden. It was a carefully constructed dance around the elephant in the room. Then, Jessica put down her phone with a dramatic sigh. I'm so stressed," she announced to the table. "My car is making a weird noise, and I just know it's going to be something expensive. I can't be dealing with car trouble right now. It's so bad for my brand." My mother immediately swooped in, her expression a mask of maternal concern. "Oh, honey, don't worry about that old thing. It's probably time for an upgrade anyway. You need something reliable and stylish for your work." "I know," Jessica whined, pushing a piece of roast chicken around her plate. "I saw the most perfect little SUV the other day. It would be amazing for my aesthetic, but it's just like so much money." "We'll figure it out," Margaret said soothingly, patting her hand. "Your father and I have some savings put away. We can help you with a down payment." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. He knew the truth. There were no savings. The only thing keeping their accounts from being permanently overdrawn was the monthly infusion of my salary. This was it, the opening I had been waiting for. I placed my fork and knife down gently, the small clinking sound cutting through the conversation. All eyes turned to me. "That's a very generous offer, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "But I'm a little confused. Which savings are you talking about?" Margaret looked flustered. "Well, you know, the money we have, our nest egg." "The nest egg?" I repeated, feigning gentle curiosity. I was under the impression that things were still pretty tight. Dad's consulting job is enough to cover the mortgage, but I didn't think it left much room for extras, let alone a down payment on a new SUV. The mention of the consulting job made my father flinch. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Elizabeth, why do you have to be so negative? It's not your money. Mom and Dad can spend their savings however they want." "You're right, it's not my money," I agreed, my voice remaining perfectly level. "But it's also not their savings, because there are no savings." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. The forced cheerfulness in the room evaporated, replaced by a tense, confused silence. My mother's face hardened. "What are you talking about? Of course, we have savings, don't be ridiculous." Her voice was sharp, defensive. She was used to me being quiet and agreeable. This calm, questioning version of me was unfamiliar and unwelcome. "Am I being ridiculous?" I asked softly. I reached down and placed the leather portfolio on the table. "I think the numbers might tell a different story." Jessica scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "What is that, your work homework? God, you're such a nerd." But my mother just stared at the portfolio, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. The initial reveal was complete. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a single accusation. I had simply asked a question and presented a fact. The carefully constructed illusion of their financial stability was beginning to crack, and the first wave of a confrontation they never expected had just washed over them. Their immediate reaction wasn't concern or curiosity, it was anger and denial. It only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just oblivious, they were willfully blind. And I was about to force them to see. "This is insane, Elizabeth," my mother snapped, her cheeks flushed with anger. "You come in here, after ignoring me for a week, and start making these wild accusations. What has gotten into you? Are you jealous of your sister? Is that what this is all about?" "Jealous?" I asked, a humorless smile touching my lips. "No, Mom, this isn't about jealousy, it's about reality." I unzipped the portfolio and slid a single piece of paper across the table towards her. It was a copy of their mortgage statement from 3 years ago, showing a past due notice stamped in angry red ink. "Do you remember this? Do you remember when Dad's business failed and you were 3 months away from foreclosure?" My father put his head in his hands, unable to watch. My mother glanced at the paper and then quickly looked away, as if it were contaminated. "That was a difficult time," she said stiffly. "But we got through it. Your father found that wonderful consulting job, and everything has been fine since." "Has it?" I asked, sliding another document across the table. This one was a bank statement from my personal savings account, dated from the same month. It showed a withdrawal for the exact amount of the past due mortgage payment. "Dad, what's the name of the company you consult for?" I asked, my gaze shifting to him. He looked up, his expression miserable. "Elizabeth, don't." "What's the name of the company?" I repeated, my voice gentle but firm. He swallowed hard. "There is no company," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Jessica looked back and forth between our parents, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What is he talking about? What's going on?" My mother's face had gone pale. The anger was draining away, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "What do you mean there's no company?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't wait for my dad to answer. I began to lay out the documents, one by one, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "There is no consulting job," I stated calmly. "There never was. For the past 36 months, I have been paying your mortgage." I laid out the bank statements, a neat stack of papers showing the automatic transfer of $2,800 from my account to theirs on the 1st of every month. I also paid the back taxes you owed, which came to just over $7,000. That was my emergency fund. I added the tax receipt to the pile. "And Jessica, that convertible you drove in college, when you defaulted on the loan, it fell to the cosigner. Me, I'm still paying it off. Here are the statements for that, too." Jessica stared at the papers, her mouth slightly agape. That's not possible," she stammered. "It is possible," I said, my voice hardening for the first time. "It's possible because while you were building your brand, I was working 60-hour weeks. While you were going on sponsored trips, I was picking up holiday shifts. The entire lifestyle you have been enjoying, this house, this dinner, the very food on your plates, has been funded by my boring nursing job." My mother was shaking her head, a low, guttural sound of denial caught in her throat. No, I would have known, your father. He told me." "He told you what you wanted to hear," I said, my gaze softening as I looked at my dad. He looked utterly defeated. "We both did. We created a story to protect you, to keep you from worrying. I thought I was doing the right thing, helping the family. But I wasn't helping. I was enabling. I was allowing you to live in a fantasy world where your actions have no consequences." The fight drained out of her, replaced by a look of profound, devastating shame. She looked at her hands, then at the pile of documents that systematically dismantled the life she thought she had. Jessica, for her part, still seemed to be struggling with the information. "So, all that money, it was from you?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," I said simply. The spell was broken. The irrefutable proof was on the table, a testament to years of my silent sacrifice and their blissful ignorance. There were no more lies to hide behind, no more convenient fictions to protect them. There was only the cold, hard truth of their dependence and my exhaustion. The second, more powerful confrontation was over. The stage was now set for the final act. The aftermath of the revelation was a suffocating, wounded silence. My mother stared at the pile of papers as if they were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. Jessica just looked small, her usual bravado completely gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, childlike confusion. The grand narrative of her life, the successful, self-made influencer supported by her proud parents, had just been exposed as a complete fiction. She was, in fact, a 25-year-old woman being subsidized by the sister she and her mother had consistently treated as an afterthought. Finally, my mother looked up, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading shame. "Elizabeth," she whispered, her voice cracking, "why didn't you tell us? Why would you let it go on for so long?" It was the question I had been waiting for. The one that shifted the blame back to me, framing my sacrifice as a form of deception. "Tell you?" I responded, my voice dangerously quiet. "When was I supposed to tell you? When you were too busy planning a surprise party for Jessica on my birthday? Should I have interrupted the champagne toast to pass around copies of your mortgage statements? You didn't want to know, Mom. You wanted to believe that everything was fine, that your lives could continue without any inconvenience. And I was tired. I was so tired of being the responsible one, the one who always had to have the difficult conversations. So I just paid. I paid for your house, your bills, your peace of mind. And I thought, foolishly, that maybe one day you would see me, that you would appreciate what I was doing." I let out a long, shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But you didn't see me. You didn't even see me enough to send a happy birthday text. You erased me. And for what? For a social media milestone? For 10,000 strangers who don't care about Jessica, not Ray." "Ally." Tears were now streaming down my mother's face. Jessica was crying, too, silent, fat tears rolling down her cheeks and dripping onto her plate. This wasn't the reaction I had expected. I had anticipated anger, denial, more accusations. But what I saw was the complete and utter collapse of their worldview. "The party was my idea," Jessica choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. "Mom said it was your birthday, and we should do something for you, but I said you wouldn't want a fuss, that you'd be working anyway. I wanted the party to be for me. I was selfish. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth." It was the first genuine apology I had heard from her in my entire life. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the final necessary step. This couldn't end with just tears and apologies. Apologies were easy. Real change was hard. I appreciate that, Jessica, but apologies aren't enough to fix this. I looked from my sister to my mother, and then to my father, who was still slumped in his chair. "The arrangement we've had is over. As of today, I am no longer paying the mortgage." The impact of those words was immediate and visceral. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Elizabeth, you can't," she pleaded. "We'll lose the house." "That is a very real possibility," I agreed, my voice devoid of emotion. "You have two options. You can sell the house and downsize to something you can actually afford, or you can both get full-time jobs and figure out how to cover the payments yourselves. The fantasy is over. Welcome to the real world." I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I gathered my papers, my hands moving with calm, deliberate motions, and slid them back into the portfolio. The dinner, the house, the family dynamic, it was all a stage set, and I was finally walking off the stage. "Elizabeth, please," my dad said, his voice hoarse. "Don't do this." I looked at him, my heart aching with a mixture of love and profound disappointment. "I have to," I said softly. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to save myself." With that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the three of them sitting in the wreckage of the comfortable, carefully constructed life I had provided for them. The silence that followed me out the door was the sound of their world finally, irrevocably, changing. The showdown was over. The consequences were just beginning. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life. There were no calls, no texts, no last-minute requests for favors. It was a strange, unnerving silence, filled with both a deep sense of loss and a burgeoning sense of freedom. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family, and now I was living in the fallout. I used the newfound surplus in my bank account to do things I had never allowed myself to do. I booked a weekend trip to the coast. I bought a new pair of expensive running shoes. I started making extra payments on my student loans, the ones that belonged solely to me. For the first time, my money was my own. My Aunt Catherine called to check in. My dad had phoned her, distraught, and told her everything. "They're in shock," Catherine reported. "Margaret and Jessica seem to think you're going to change your mind, that you're just trying to teach them a lesson and will swoop in to save the day at the last minute." "I'm not," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't a lesson, it's a conclusion." And I meant it. True to my word, on the first of the month I did not make the mortgage payment. The reality of my absence hit them like a tidal wave. Suddenly, there were frantic, tearful voicemails, my mother begging me to just talk to them, my sister telling me she had been looking for jobs, my dad just saying my name over and over, his voice thick with regret. I didn't answer. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was a necessary boundary. They had to solve this problem without me. About 2 months after the dinner, Aunt Catherine called again. "They're selling the house," she said. "They had a realtor come in. They can't afford it, and the bank was about to start foreclosure proceedings." She also told me that my mother had found a full-time job as a receptionist at a doctor's office, and Jessica was now working 40 hours a week as a manager at the retail store where she had previously worked part-time. The influencer dream was on indefinite hold. The news brought me a grim sense of satisfaction, but also a pang of sadness for the life they had lost, even if it had been built on a lie. A few weeks later, there was a knock on my apartment door. It was my mother and Jessica. They looked different, thinner, tired, the lines of stress etched around their eyes. They weren't wearing their usual stylish clothes. They looked like two people who were finally understanding the weight of their own lives. They didn't try to make excuses. My mother, her voice stripped of all its usual performative cheer, gave me the apology I had waited my whole life to hear. "We took you for granted, Elizabeth," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You were our rock, and we never once stopped to think about how heavy that must have been for you. We were so busy building Jessica up that we didn't notice we were tearing you down. There is no excuse for what we did, especially on your birthday. It was a monstrous, selfish thing to do, and I am so sorry." Jessica nodded, her own eyes red-rimmed. "I was a spoiled brat," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so wrapped up in my own little world that I treated you like you were invisible. I'm ashamed of who I was. Working a real job, paying my own bills, I'm finally realizing how much you did for us. Thank you, Elizabeth, and I am so deeply sorry." It was real. The apologies were genuine, born not of a desire to get something from me, but from a place of hard-won, painful understanding. It wasn't a magic wand. The years of hurt didn't just vanish, but it was a start. A foundation, this time built on truth instead of lies. We started slowly. We met for coffee once a week. They never asked for anything. They just asked about me, my work, my life, my friends. They were learning, for the first time, who I was as a person, not just as a functionary in their lives. They sold the big family house and moved into a small, modest townhouse they could afford on their own salaries. The process was humbling for them, but it was also healing. They were finally a team, standing on their own 2 feet. The reconciliation was slow and careful, but it was real. I had lost the role of the family savior, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable, their respect. And for the first time, when I looked at my family, I felt a sense of peace and a quiet, hopeful vindication.